Hello all. We are going to look at the Python Enhanced Proposal today, which is sometimes referred to as PEP or PEP8 in the book, as they say. And basically, it is a way that all the Python programmers, or maybe the community, decided would be a better way to create code. Now, if you don't do it this way, you don't have. It's not like your programs aren't going to run, but this is will increase readability and usability amongst when you're sharing these types of files. So because of that, this statement is true. Easier, it's better to make something that's easier to read than easier to write. And in fact, maybe I should say this is just that way. Because sure, we can have all these nice ways of writing code, but it might only be understandable to us. It might be only our version of shorthand or something like that. Everybody else who's going to work with us may not understand it. You might not even understand it a few years later when you try to look at it. So they have these kind of rules, or as you can see, guidelines that will help everything kind of be more clear to future readers. Let's just say that. And you can find this. It's at the end of chapter 4. They have a link there that you can go and see the full list. I just kind of focused on the ones that we can kind of understand today. Up to where we're at now. So let's take a look at some of these examples. Indentation levels equal 4 spaces. So remember when we're doing our if statements or our for statements, we always indent the next line. Believe it or not, 4 spaces is what they decided on is best for that indentation. This thing's a little picky. I guess it is, but I guess they just don't want a lot of wonky ones. They also say try to use the tab key just so that you're used to it. The problem is that some IDEs, especially ones that are kind of don't just handle programming languages, will have a tab that is kind of like a reformatter, kind of does like a margin in Word. So be careful about that. But if you can test it out, in fact, we tested Visual Studio out today for that. It actually tabbed exactly at 4 spaces, and it in the tab, and it put these blank spaces in as opposed to one large block. Max line length is 80. So in other words, when you're writing code, what you would like to see is not notice that this line is kind of long. Say right here. Is it 80 letters? No, I don't think so, crossed. But when you start hitting 80, then all of a sudden they say just go to the next line and write it there. And you have that continuation function in Python. It will recognize that line is not finished and go search on the next line. The same goes for comments. Sometimes I'm guilty of this one because I tend to put comments on might put comments. Well, I just make long comments. Let's face it. Let's face it. So a lot of times I'll have to break it up or put into different lines, and use blank lines between differences in content. So in other words, you want to separate things out. So let's say you create a bunch of variables, like dog, cat, whatever. That's kind of good to kind of group those all together, then put a line in between or next, and then maybe do equations or, print with the next block, and then go ahead and do another block later on, and just kind of separate them space, but just not too many spaces. You don't want to put 5 spaces between each one. Avoid excessive white space, and this means horizontally, not vertically. So if you look, this has a large amount of white space in, and the Python isn't going to do anything with this space. It's just going to ignore it. So all that it can do is kind of make this worse to read. Um, if you can avoid it, keep it thin. Some people like putting one or two spaces, let's say between the parenthesis and the quotes, or between, the plus sign and word, just to make it a little easier for them to read. That's not the important part. It's the excessive that we're worried about. Not too many inline comments. Let's go ahead. I'm kind of doing all this stuff without looking. I still have yet to put Visual Studio or on this on this machine. So it but we can look at a py file, and we're going to open with, actually I think we're, well, I guess we have no choice. I try to open it with just this good old-fashioned notepad. So it's not going to look that good on here, but that's okay. So this is our actual py, or where we're doing the Python file. As you can see, we've done lists in here before. Here are my comments, and I think I did something similar with you all in some of the other ones. But what they're talking about with inline comments are like this. This is totally legal to say put inline comment here. That is, believe it or not, fine. It won't read past as soon as the interpreter goes. It'll read this area, leave out the space, and then when it hits the comment, it'll just not even pay attention to the rest. So you can do that, but as you can see, in a busy page like this, you might just totally overlook it. Or even misread it in some cases, but usually it's just kind of overlook it. And then again, I'm going to talk about that white space. Now the vertical white space that we were talking about before, hitting enter beforehand, since I have a whole bunch of commented lines here, why not just link them all up? And then put a space here so it separates it so I can actually see where I'm actually doing the computing. This is a lot of commenting, but that's because I was taking the stuff in and out and adding it and subtracting it, and as I was going to show an example in class. So I'm going to be using all this material because these are, if you look really close, they're actual lines of code. So I can uncomment it and use those things later. Generally, when you do it, if you're not using the code and not planning on using the code ever again, just delete it, get rid of it. I know it's hard to do that when you've worked a long time on creating something, but if you feel really bad, you can just copy and paste it into another file. That'd be fine. Let's go back. Oops. I'm going to go back to this guy, and as I'm looking at it, I probably should make a PowerPoint slide out of this. It's pretty just black and ugly. But actually, the reason why I'm doing it is a lot of times I'll use these to write down these notepads to write, or WinPad to write down actual code, and Word tends to auto capitalize and auto space and do all this crazy stuff which I might not want it to do, and instead of turning that stuff off or remembering to turn it off and then remember to turn it back on when I'm going to use Word for a regular document, I don't. So I apologize for that, but we'll probably keep with this. It's nice, and at least it's nice and black and white, and it's easy to read that way. All right, not too many inline comments we covered. Avoid L's and zeros. See, you guys might have looked at this and said, is that a 1 and a 0? Yeah, that's the whole point, is that L's look like 1s, zeros look like O's, and you can make that mistake. So when you're doing naming conventions, unless it's real obvious, like list, obviously nobody's going to write one ist, you know what I mean? But but for other things, like is it pane 1 or pane L? You know what I mean? That you don't know. So just go ahead and try to avoid those if you can. But like I said, if it's a recognizable name like hello, um, opera, code, whatever you want to say, then it's all right. It's just when you're not going to be sure whether it's a one or an L, because usually because you've truncated something like that. So in other words, you say long line, so you might go L line or something like that, but then it comes out, it looks like one line or something like that, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. All right, and see, I say right here, see the book for the rest. Um, that sounds good. I will go back up to 1 and 2 just for a second to show you this. So this is what they mean for the 4 spacing. FOR space is 4 characters long, and that's how much that indent is underneath it. Lastly is the 80. They say some IDEs actually have a little line out here that's at the 80 spot, but not as many as you'd think. So don't rely on that. Instead, just what I try to do, like in our case, I always try to kind of keep them inside the box so I can read it. If you can keep it inside the monitor. In fact, that's where the 80 line rule came up. Originally, I think monitors were fixed fixed formats, meaning they had the font. You didn't get to choose the font, and you didn't get to choose how many characters across screen. It was already picked for you, and it was 80, and so you tried to do that. We are going to do that. In fact, if you look at your homework this week, you will notice at the very bottom that I say that you're going to try to keep all your programs to this PEP standard. If you have any questions, put them on the Q&A, and I'll be more than happy to look them over.